This is the Irregular Militia, a ragtag band of vodka-ridden Gopniks protecting their homeland. They excel at guerrilla warfare and the Eastern Europeans' uncanny, seemingly natural skill to make literally anything out of old oil barrels and logs. You may have noticed that the IMF aren't like your usual squad faction. While they lack technology like helicopters, scopes, and soap, they instead excel in using unique Cold War era equipment and rustic, cheap fortifications to outsmart and outmaneuver their foes. Their strength lies in their ability to adapt, ambush, and use the terrain to their advantage. But many players struggle to fully embrace their inner Gopnik and tap into the true potential of this unconventional faction. So today, let me tell you why you suck with the Irregular Militia. I'll teach you their strengths and weaknesses, how to best use their unique structures and emplacements, and how to utilize each role in their arsenal, as well as some squad compositions for maximum fun and efficiency. By the end of this video, I guarantee you'll know everything there is to know about the Irregular Militia. So, grab your best pair of track pants and at least a fifth of vodka, and let's get into this. Chapters are timestamped for your convenience. There's a tendency for squad players to play every faction the same way, and if you play the militia the same way you play, say, the US Army or Russian ground forces, you're rightfully going to be stomped into the ground. This faction is not designed for a man-to-man fight. Conventional forces have better armor and helicopters. The IMF soldiers probably don't even know what a helicopter is. So no, if you want to win a fight against a better equipped conventional force, you need to start thinking like a guerrilla. No, not that guerrilla, this guerrilla. Focus on ambushes and hidden run attacks, hide in camo nets, cut off enemy supply lines, and shoot down helicopters. Thankfully, these are all things the IMF are great at. So from now on, when you're playing the IMF, embrace your inner Sun Tzu and utilize the IMF's arsenal to the best of its ability. More on that later. But Monty, you're kind of making the militia sound like a cheap knockoff of the more interesting insurgent faction. And they would be, dear viewer, if it wasn't for their next greatest strength, Minecraft. That's right, Minecraft. You see, the militia don't see FOB construction like conventional factions. They don't need high-grade materials, they just need a couple old barrels and some duct tape. Their buildings are therefore significantly cheaper, if not lesser in quality, and they sport several unique emplacements and structures. This means you can do significantly more with your FOB with the same amount of build. So, I urge you to build your little hearts out as the IMF. Build an AA FOB to counter enemy helicopters. Build World War II era field guns and SPG-9 recoilless rifles to destroy enemy armor. Or make a rocket artillery base and rain hellfire on the enemy. The possibilities are endless, and we will go more in depth on these structures later, as well as tips on how to best use them. The militia's light vehicles is a testament to a Gopnik's determination to put literally any weapon they can onto the back of a Toyota. Their exceptional weaponry, their speed and maneuverability, and their relatively low ticket cost, the militia's light vehicles punch massively above their weight. Does the militia have a crude way of doing things? Yes. Are most of them almost perpetually wasted? Absolutely. But one thing you can't deny is the close-range combat prowess of the militia. Most of their weapons have strong iron sights and deal powerful damage, or at least come with extra rounds. Not to mention, they're usually strapped to the teeth with FN FAL rifle grenades, AT grenades, and RPGs, making any headlong vehicle charge into the militia a suicide plan. Woe to any armor who ends up surrounded by IMF militia. They will disable your tracks and pick you apart piece by piece. The conventional armor department is where the militia's cracks start to show. Their main battle tank, the M62, is the worst tank in the game. They get some decent scout vehicles in the form of the BRDM and the BTR-80, but they won't stand up to heavy armor. The BMP-1 and BMP-2 are your best chance against the onslaught of conventional armor, but you're usually going to need to be backed up with infantry to swing the odds in your favor. The militia have no helicopters. This is a simple restriction, but one with massive implications. No helicopters means no quick resupplies, no ferrying troops across the map in a matter of seconds, and no airborne scouting. Shut up, we'll get to you later. What's more, your enemy usually will have helicopters that you'll need to shoot down in order to even the playing field. Now, with the general strengths and weaknesses out of the way, we can start getting into the nitty-gritty, a bottom to top analysis. Just a disclaimer, I'll let you know when I'm skipping over a class because it's fairly benign or boring, because I just don't want to waste your time talking about a class that's not really interesting or relevant. Consistent with their name, the Militia have an irregular array of small arms to choose from, all coming with their own tactical considerations. The AK-74, the M4, and the M16A2 all are common weapons used by opposing conventional forces. Use a similar weapon to the enemies for sneaky flanks, tricking the enemy into thinking you're friendly, or simply use whatever has the best optic or personal preference. The M16A2 sports a beautiful 3x20 optic for medium range engagements, while the AK-74 and M4 stick to a close combat optic and iron sights, respectively. The S.T.A.L.K.E.R, close combat optic AK-74, and iron sights M16A2 all bring an extra sandbag for making your own cover on the battlefield. Finally, a rifleman can choose the SKS rifle with a 4x PU scope if you expect long-range engagements. Although, do mind the PU scope is a little cracked. I personally really enjoy the S.T.A.L.K.E.R since it got its buff a couple months ago. It packs more of a punch than the carbines, and the recoil is actually manageable now. No matter what weapon you choose, the variety of small arms available make the Militia capable of every range, short, medium, or long distance. Playing into their emphasis on asymmetrical warfare and antiquated but reliable older arsenal, the IMF bring two unique roles to the forefront, the ambusher and the infiltrator. Starting with the ambusher, this role has two unique variants, one armed with an S.T.A.L.K.E.R mounted rifle grenade, and one equipped with anti-tank grenades. Starting with my personal favorite, the rifle grenade variant acts as kind of a hybrid grenadier role. Obviously, as the name implies, this is a role outfitted for ambushing, in this case ambushing infantry. Its ranging only scales to 80 meters, but you can shoot far beyond that range if you know what you're doing. More on that later. The official range being only 80 meters and your S.T.A.L.K.E.R only having iron sights plays into the idea that you're supposed to ambush your enemy at close range. Set up in an area with a good line of sight, dig up your camo kit, and lie in wait within 100 meters of where enemies are likely to attack. Then, once infantry are spotted, let loose rifle grenades and terrorize the enemy, all while giving your team callouts on the enemy attack. The camo net comes with both ambusher variants and is resupplyable. You can place up to 4 at a time for you and your friends at 25 ammo each. The camo net itself does change based on its environment and allows the user on the inside to see reliably, but still hides the user well. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with the camo net. You can make 4 fighting positions for a defense, prepare an ambush position, or you can make 4 of them and only sit in one of them, forcing the enemy to play whack-a-mole with you. Overall, this ambusher kit is particularly strong at defense because of its spammable camo net and anti-infantry focus. May I also mention that this is a direct combat kit, meaning every squad of at least 3 can have 1 ambusher per squad. The second kit might prove a bit trickier. This kit is a largely normal kit, an iron sights M16 and 2 grenades, with the exception that it comes with the infantry camo net and 2 RKG3 anti-tank grenades. Initially, I thought this was a role outfitted to sit on a road enemy armor might come down, hide in a camo net, jump out, throw your AT grenades, and then wait for the crew to come out for repairs and blast them. There's 2 issues with that strategy. One is that while the AT grenades do reliable damage to the turret and the hull, actually as much as an RPG might do, I found it impossible to do damage to the tracks or engine of a vehicle with this weapon. Perhaps that's a bug, I'm just not sure. It does damage wheels, but not enough to warrant aiming for them. 2 AT grenades can kill a light vehicle, like an MRAP, but will at best only moderately damage something like a BTR or a Striker, or maybe just disable their turret. All that said, using AT grenades to disable vehicles is a no-go, It just doesn't work for whatever reason. Therefore, I have another way to utilize this class. Armor is kind of infamous in squad for just running itself into enemy infantry, getting within the minimum arming distance so AT can't do anything, and then just fucking up infantry. Something that might happen to you a lot as the Militia, considering their armor department isn't the best. This class is the fuck around and find out role for that armor tactic. There is no arming distance on these bad boys, and they can be thrown reliably even on low stamina. You will have to be very close to use them, as their range seems maxed out at around 25 meters, but even then, I could only reliably hit my target at 20 meters. There is a little parachute that pops out when you throw the AT grenade, so if you throw the thing really high in the air over the vehicle, the parachute will deploy at about 20 meters, slowing the grenade from moving any further and drift down onto its target. Using this method, you could even damage tanks from the front by throwing the grenade high in the air and watching as it drifts down onto the tank's rear armor. As for aiming the damn things, remember that it has a steep drop off that you have to work around, so at 20 meters aim just above the vehicle with your character's thumb, and at 15 meters or less aim at the top of the vehicle with your thumb. So AT grenades are something to be used at extremely close ranges. They're strong at disabling turrets and causing hull damage. You can use its parachute physics to make it land on top of a vehicle's turret or its rear, but it's more difficult to do with some vehicles. However, do not use this whatsoever to disable vehicles. It straight up doesn't work against engines and tracks. OWI, please fix and all that. In summary, this version of the Ambusher is intended to provide the squad camo nets and to be a solution to enemy armor that try and bully your squad. 2 AT grenades isn't going to hack it to destroy enemy armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, so don't try and hunt vehicles with this class unless it's a light vehicle like a MAT-V or a Tiger. Stick close to your squad and provide fire support with your 2 grenades and even your 2 anti-tank grenades to destroy enemy infantry when needed. The Direct Combat Automatic Rifleman isn't interesting, a pretty decent gun, but that's it. The Infiltrator is the unique fire support class for the IMF. It comes equipped with a short-range carbine AK-S74U with a 45 round banana magazine, and a VZ61 Scorpion machine gun pistol as a handy secondary. It also comes equipped with 4 anti-tank grenades and 2 frag grenades. You do, however, forsake your precious camo net. This is essentially a better version of the AT grenade Ambusher. 4 anti-tank grenades is more than enough to destroy or at least heavily damage enemy armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles. Still, you should stick close to your squad and do not be afraid to use some of your anti-tank grenades to soften up enemy infantry. This class ultimately thrives in close quarters combat, so attempt to close the distance no matter the circumstance. The Fire Support Automatic Rifleman is also not much to write home about. It has an RPK-74, which is good for fighting on the move. Back onto more interesting roles, we have 2 variants of the Grenadier role. One is your standard Iron Sights M16A2 with an M203 underbarrel grenade launcher, with the usual smoke and frag rounds that come with it. The more interesting second variant, however, comes in the form of an RPG with 5 fragmentation rounds. This is fucking lovely, because fragmentation rounds have a bigger kill radius than your normal grenade. This trades the utility of smoke for extra firepower. The Militia's light anti-tank kits continue this pattern. We have 2 variants. The first is, again, fairly benign. It's nice, we get a shitty 3x 1P29 scope on top of our AK-74 with 2 fragmentation and 2 heat rounds for our iron-sighted RPG. Nice to have that second heat round, sure, but again, it gets interesting at the second variant. We don't get a shoulder-fired launcher, we get an FN-FAL equipped with 5 heat rounds. The FN-FAL heat grenades are exceptional because they can collectively do more damage to an enemy vehicle than a tandem round. If I shoot an M3 tandem into the back of a BMP2, it does about 70% damage. If I shoot all 5 of my heat frag rounds into the back of a BMP2, it straight up blows up. And might I remind you that this is a fire support kit, so you can have one of these in every single squad. Now, this isn't objectively better than tandem rounds. While collectively they do more damage, it has less penetrative power than a tandem round, not able to penetrate the armor of an enemy tank, and is incapable of destroying a tank's engine or ammo rack. Secondly, all that damage is divided among 5 different heat grenades, meaning an enemy IFV would have to sit idle and let you shoot it for upwards of 60 seconds to blow it up. So in order to maximize your damage, let me give you some tips. Your first priority should be to disable the vehicle's engine or tracks, immobilizing it and allowing you to fire your next 4 heat grenades. Next, you can either aim for the turret to disable the enemy's weapon, or run to its rear and go for hull damage. A striker, BTR-82, LAV, or ZDL should be able to be destroyed with your 4 remaining heat grenades. You will not have enough damage to destroy a heavily armored infantry fighting vehicle like a BMP-2 or a Bradley, although you can heavily damage it. Finally, a tank cannot be penetrated by heat grenades except for its rear and tracks, so focus on tracking the enemy tank and letting the bigger guns on your team come and mop it up. Due to its raw destructive power, these heat grenades are absolutely essential to the militia's anti-armor capabilities. Using it effectively, however, takes some skill. Now, let's talk about how to shoot the rifle grenade beyond 80 meters, shall we? This applies to the fragmentation rifle grenades as well, of course. At 100 meters, simply aim at the 60-meter icon. You won't be able to see the vehicle exactly, but you can make do pretty easily. Just line the vehicle up from the side, then focus on the markings I tell you. At 200 meters, line up the target on the little dud between the 2 wings of the heat grenade. At 300 meters is where things begin to get tricky. You see how there's a bit of a pattern on the F and FAL? A clean part, a dirty part, and a clean part again? Well, just after the first dirty part of the rifle here, right smack dab in the middle is where you are supposed to fire. And from here, things get really unreliable, because 310 meters means you'd have to fire slightly above that sweet spot. And if it's moving, well, let's just say that would take a lot of practice to keep going up in range. So let's stop there. But it is possible to go beyond 300 meters. However, I don't really know if it's worth all the practice. The IMF is the only faction that has it. In practice, it's going to be extremely impressive if you can hit anything above 100 meters. So just try and remember to aim for the 60-meter mark, and you'll be a very good rifle grenadier. The kit itself is still very much a close-range class, meant to punish vehicles for getting too aggressive, but with a bit more range than the AT grenades. I think the heat grenades might have just as much damage as the thrown AT grenades, but I'm too lazy to verify that. Lastly, this class is definitely good enough for hunting vehicles, at least anything up to a Bradley or a BMP, so joining a vehicle hunter squad isn't a bad idea with this class. The last fire support kit, the Marksman, sucks. It has no bipod and no magnifiable scope, with only a 4x scope. Don't pick this kit. Moving on, the Specialist Kit's machine gun is my favorite in the world, the PKM. I may or may not have a PKM waifu pillow sitting on my bed behind me, but overall it's not interesting. Let's move on. The 2 Specialist heavy anti-tank kits are fairly benign. One is equipped with an RPG-7 with 2 fragmentation rounds and 2 tandem rounds, and the other is equipped with an RPG-29 with 2 tandem rounds. It's pretty standard stuff, but it's nice to know the infantry has some strong anti-tank options. And last for our Specialist kits, we have the Saboteur. We forfeit the repair kit, barbed wire, and sandbags, and turn it in for 3 anti-tank mines, 3 TNT, and the best of all, 5 decoy rocks. The 3 TNT are lovely for radio hunting. You can now place 2 TNT side by side on a radio and they'll go off at different times, immediately putting the enemy radio on bleed, and probably killing some suckers trying to save the radio too. The 3 anti-tank mines help with the whole asymmetrical angle. You can place up to 10 of the bad boys on predictable roads the enemy armor might come on, then ambush them with anti-tank equipment. Saboteurs should therefore work hand in hand with anti-tank squads, or should be a rat behind enemy lines, constantly scouring for enemy radios to blow up. Make sure to lay out your mines in a checkerboard formation. Mines only detonate when either a wheel or a track rolls over it. By checkerboarding your mines, you maximize your chances of a vehicle kill. Lastly, let's go full circle back to the squad leader kits. Most of it's your standard stuff, but there is 2 things that stand out. 2 squad leader kits come equipped with a grenade launcher. You only get 2 fragmentation rounds, but you retain 6 total smoke grenades for signaling, which is great for coordination. Launch a red smoke where the enemy is, or a blue smoke to cover your team's push, and so on. The GP25 is a better grenade launcher than the M203, because it can range farther, and you get a free anti-tank grenade. But you will lose your scope, so choose based on your personal preference. The militia's unique buildings and weapon systems is another way it sets itself apart from other factions, forsaking high-quality building materials in exchange for good old Gorilla Glue and duct tape. The militia have many rustic structures and camo netting at their disposal for a significantly cheaper price than most factions. Observation towers that cost 600 build for most factions now only cost 100 build, but is nothing more than a cobbled together stand with camo netting thrown on top. Haskell walls that cost 150 build for other factions now cost a mere 50 build, but are just a bunch of logs thrown together, no barbed wire to keep enemies from vaulting over. Even your spawn bunker, something that usually costs 500 build, now only costs 100 build. You get the gist. You're paying less for something, but usually it's going to be lesser in quality, although some things just look worse when they actually do the same job just as well. This means a couple of things for the militia. One is that they can do a lot more with one logistics vehicle than a conventional faction can. Hell, you can build your whole anti-tank fob with just 700 build. And that goes for ammo too. Generally, your weapon systems use a lot less than conventional factions, but we'll get to that in a second. But they don't just make existing structures cheaper, they also get several new toys to play with. One is the Hedgehog Tank Trap. Costing only 20 build and able to place as many as you want, you can easily use these as obstacles to stop enemy vehicles, something that might be great for an ambush fob in particular. The next 3 buildings are all various forms of camo netting. Everybody either loves or hates camo netting based on the person that's closest to it, as when you're close, you can see right through, but from farther away, it's solid. The militia lean heavily into camo netting. The first building is a simple camo net wall that you can place in front of literally anything for an impromptu firing position, only costing 50 build. Next is a small camo net tent, also costing only 50 build, where you could hide a heavy machine gun or just a couple friends as a firing position. And finally, a very large canopy intended to conceal vehicles while also providing a strong firing position, only 100 build. This canopy works hand in hand in protecting vehicles with the 200 build hold down, a protected position where your vehicles can park and fire with cover, making a strong firing position altogether. The cheapness of the militia structures combined with the small and nimble technical logistics vehicles make you able to cheaply and quickly build to your heart's content. The possibilities are basically endless, but I'll save some ideas and tips for you once we're done with the weapon systems. The ZIS-3 field gun is a World War II era anti-tank gun with the ability to fire heat, fragmentation, and smoke rounds. It costs 450 build and you can usually have up to 2 per fob, although that will depend on your unit. The ammo is dirt cheap, at 50 ammo for the heat rounds and 40 ammo for fragmentation and smoke rounds. It also hits like a truck. It will penetrate every vehicle's frontal armor easily with the exception of tanks. It has a very fast travel time, hitting the vehicle almost instantly, even at long ranges. It does struggle to pin through tanks' frontal armor, but will if you know where the weak spots are, much like the cannon of a tank. The reload time is only 5 seconds long, so it's perfectly viable just to spam rounds at a vehicle until it blows up. The sight is nice, ranging up to 2100 kilometers. The gun is easily maneuverable as well, able to quickly and easily swivel onto a target and fire. The only real complaint I have is that the gun shakes a lot when you fire, so it's hard to see exactly where you hit the target sometimes, which is really important if you're shooting at a tank. This field gun is a support weapon at its best. but does have the flaw of being a big gun and thus very easy to spot and destroy. Thankfully, it only costs a minuscule amount of effort and build to drag a camo net either in front or over the weapon to conceal it. Critics may point out this weapon does absolutely need either range or the element of surprise to be effective, but to that I say, if we look at the field gun as we did an anti-tank guided missile platform like the TOW or Cornet, well, so do they. But I do advise putting the field gun in a position with a long range line of sight, preferably overlooking objectives or roads where enemy armor is likely to come out. When possible, don't hesitate to support your infantry with smoke and fragmentation rounds. The value of the field gun, at least in my mind, is invaluable to the militia. It just takes a squad leader and a shovel with a logistics vehicle to put a field gun up that can engage and destroy enemy vehicles quickly, efficiently, and cheaply for relatively low risk. For me, it's a no-brainer. If you are a squad leader playing as the IMF, you need to use this weapon. It is what is going to even the odds against enemy armor. On to the former king of the militia AT, the SPG-9 recoilless rifle. The smaller brethren of the field gun, this anti-tank weapon costs only 300 build with a cost of 80 ammo per heat round and 40 ammo per fragmentation round, with around a 6.5 second reload and capable of damaging most vehicles from the front. Actually, very similar penetration to the field gun. This is an alternative to the monster that is the field gun, although at a less economical cost for what you're getting. You can have up to 3 in your fob, depending on your battalion, which is handy, but I recommend this weapon only for short-range engagements and places where the field gun may not fit. I do kind of see the SPG-9 as just a weaker version of the mighty ZIS-3. Don't get me wrong, it's still a strong weapon, and you probably will get mileage out of it if you have to use it, but why have a small gun when you can have a big gun? As for machine guns, none are quite interesting. They're only 100 build though, so that's nice. The mortar is nothing special either. It's like every other mortar in the game, except that it costs 50 less build to create at 250 build rather than 300. The UB-32 rocket artillery is our next heavy hitter on the list. It rains down 32 57mm rockets within a large 200 meter spread. It costs 300 ammo to load and a whopping 1 minute and 15-second reload. And it only takes about 10 seconds to fire off all those rockets and begin loading again. It has a range of 2,000 meters. This is the big ammo trap of the militia. Assuming you're constantly reloading and firing this thing, you're going to be using approximately 300 ammunition every 1 minute and 30 seconds, a massive strain on your team's logistics. Therefore, if used at all, the rocket artillery must be used in a similar way a commander's artillery barrage is used, to saturate an enemy position before a friendly assault, or to stop an enemy's push in its tracks by laying down hellfire. Due to its immense ammo drain, you're basically going to need someone constantly running logistics in order to keep this thing online. While the UB-32 is exciting to use, I cannot possibly believe that you're going to use that ammo and time as efficiently on rocket artillery as you would using field guns and SPG-9s. I'm not going to tell you explicitly to not use this weapon, but just try and use your time and team's resources wisely. Don't hold up new fobs or other important weapon systems just to keep the rocket artillery firing. Last but certainly not least is the ZU-23-2 anti-air platform. At 250 build with 50 ammo cost per reload, the ZU is a beast at shredding enemy helicopters from the sky. It's also capable of destroying and damaging light to medium vehicles. This is the IMF's best weapon against your enemy's biggest advantage, helicopters. Put this in a good line of sight, close to where enemy helicopters might go to, like a relevant objective for example, and blast them out of the sky. While the IMF have a truly astonishing and unique infantry roster, their armor roster is where the cracks start to show. Most of their equipment falls back on old and outdated Soviet-era equipment and rustic technicals outfitted with anything from machine guns to rocket pods. This does not mean IMF's armor is explicitly worse, it just means that they have to play in a more abstract and asymmetrical manner than other factions, revolving around hidden run attacks and ambushes. It does mean that going toe-to-toe with conventional factions armor will not end well for the militia. None of what I'd like to say about the militia's heavy armor is particularly unique to the militia. Its older armor means it needs to always get the first shot off. In other words, it needs to ambush. You'll want to stick together and wolfpack when there is an opportunity to. Overall, heavy armor is the IMF's biggest weakness. It's got some good vehicles like the BMP-2 and the BMP-1, and their scout cars could be even considered strong. But their M62 main battle tank will not hold up well at all against conventional forces tanks. Militia is simply going to need to leverage its advantages in other departments, and use asymmetrical warfare to compensate. More on that later. Your best chance against shutting down the enemy's helicopters rely on these 4 vehicles equipped with the ZU anti-air platform. This should be a top priority for the militia team. Enemy helicopters constantly zipping across the map in seconds, bringing supplies and new spawns for your enemy is absolutely crucial to disrupt. And lastly, my favorite, the technicals. I originally meant to tell you all I know about technicals here, but the script kept growing until it was the length of its own video. So, we will cover technicals at another time. For now, understand technicals are the militia's best bang for their buck, and punch significantly above their weight if used correctly. It's the BM-21 Grad, a 40-tube, 122mm multiple launch rocket system. It has a range of 2,050 meters, not much further than the UB-32 rocket artillery, and it costs a staggering 6 minutes to reload. For this reason, a Grad must not be used wastefully. A well-placed Grad strike can cripple an enemy defense, disable a fob, and maybe even a radio, and can even bombard and disable enemy vehicles. But one used willy-nilly will spend most of its time driving back to main, after wasting its barrage on a field with 3 infantry in it. So the Grad must be reserved for high priority targets. I recommend the Grad have its own squad attached to it, communicating with the other squad leaders and asking where is best for the bombardment. So be patient with the Grad. Wait for the best targets, a massive enemy attack on your defense, a preparatory barrage on a defense before your infantry assaults, or an enemy fob that needs to be destroyed. Militia logistics is an interesting one. Besides the fact that some of them are armored, which seems nice until you realize you can hardly see out of the damn things, the IMF also get access to logistical Toyotas, sporting 1400 max supplies instead of the traditional big boys 3000 supplies. These little guys are faster than the usual truck, which is an incredibly important part of logistics. The speed in which you can get to the midpoint and place that first fob down can decide the first half of the game. The difficulty is the thing is massively unwieldy and prone to spinning out. A good driver can learn not to spin out as much, but sometimes it's just an eventuality. So whether that makes up for its speed, I don't know. The good news is that your team's logistics is spread out across multiple different pickup trucks, meaning you can have a lot of smaller fobs, rather than just a few, especially since the cost of your buildings is so much lower. The militia's commander assets are objectively weaker than the other factions. While conventional factions can call in close air support, mighty artillery barrages, and UAVs, the IMF only have 2 commander call-ins. A dependable but ultimately inferior heavy mortar barrage spread out over a 150 meter radius and lasts for about 60 seconds. Of course, use this to soften up an enemy position or derail an enemy assault. And a nifty drone, which will probably be what you're using most of the time as commander. It can go to an altitude of around 60 meters, and has unlimited range from the operator as far as I know. It has a very strong lifetime at 10 minutes, by which time you'll be able to call another one in soon. This is an incredible tool for scouting. You should easily be able to find enemy fobs with this thing, even more so than you might with a UAV. If you find a radio, you can try and place TNT on the drone and fly it close to the enemy radio, but you've only got 30 seconds to do that before the TNT explodes, so suicide drones are still mainly an insurgent thing. Focus on looking for enemy fobs with your drone. The drone is fragile, so attempt to stay hidden as much as possible. Only 1 or 2 well-placed shots can take it out. Players will often play squad in only 2 different types of squads: armor squads with 2 to 3 men per vehicle, or 9-man infantry squads. While these squad compositions have their place and are the most common type of squad for a reason, there are less common squad compositions that players can take advantage of. Smaller 2 to 4 man squads attached to vehicles, each with their own singular purpose, for example. Due to the militia's additional light vehicles, the militia in particular are well suited to these small, modular squads. Let's show a couple off. First, we have a 4 to 6 man vehicle hunter squad, armed to the teeth with handheld anti-tank grenades, heat rifle grenades, and RPGs. Attached to an SPG-9 or Cornet Technical for additional AT capability, as well as a mobile ammo box for rearming. This squad's obvious purpose is to hunt down enemy armor. Keep in mind that every man left off of an objective to perform another task is a cost you have to take into perspective with any of these squad compositions. 4 men simply blocking off a road and ambushing enemy vehicles is far more acceptable than 6 men, so if you have a larger squad, you should seek to actively hunt vehicles around the map rather than lying in wait. Next, we have a multi-purpose 2 to 3 man entrenchment squad. Armed with a logistics Toyota, you may create a variety of FOBs with specific roles with this squad. Create and man a humble anti-air base with a line of sight around relevant objectives for harassing enemy helicopters. Create and man a fire support base armed with UB-32 rocket artillery and mortars. Create an anti-tank FOB with field guns, SPG-9s, and camo netting, overlooking roads or common avenues of approach of enemy armor. Use tank traps to cut off roads and force enemy vehicles to stop and maneuver around them. Place anti-tank mines around the tank traps for additional effectiveness. Or you may simply entrench a defensive position relevant to an objective or on top of an objective itself. An entrenchment squad can attempt to create multiple types of FOBs or focus on only one. Just remember that every logistics vehicle you take to build an anti-air, an anti-tank, or a fire support FOB is one less logi building and maintaining attack and defensive FOBs. Additionally, take into consideration that every FOB you build is a potential 20 tickets lost to your team if enemies find it. So do not build FOBs unless you believe they will carry their weight. Lastly, consider helping your team build defensive and attack FOBs before building these other useful but ultimately less priority FOBs. A 2 to 3 man technical squad can have a variety of jobs depending on their attached vehicle's weaponry. Most are obvious. Rocket pods provide fire support, anti-air techies hunt helicopters, but MG techies should specifically be used to harass and suppress enemy infantry, as well as ambush enemy logistics vehicles behind enemy lines. In summary, the Irregular Militia relies on its unique, cheap structures, close-range infantry firepower, and nimble, light vehicles to carry the day. The more innovative the IMF squad leaders are at creating modular squads with specific tasks, and at building FOBs with specified roles, the more you'll be able to exploit the IMF's biggest advantages and have a better chance at winning the game. Ambush enemy armor as often as you can and punish them for getting in range of short-range AT weaponry. Cut off supply routes with smartly placed FOBs or technicals to disrupt enemy logistics, and constantly harass the enemy's helicopters with your robust anti-air arsenal. Make ample use of their cheap and effective camo nets to create strong fighting positions and to conceal your most powerful weaponry. Squad leaders should seek to close the distance against enemy infantry to make use of the militia's plentiful anti-personnel explosives. Overall, the militias prove themselves a force to be reckoned with in the right hands. The militia was a breath of fresh air to me, a welcome break from the monotony of the constant US versus Russian matchups that you see almost every single game now, due to the implementation of the voting system, and the insistence of seemingly every squad player to play the same factions the same way, over and over again. In fact, I was hesitant to make the militia guide at all, or any faction guides for that matter, because of how little play less popular factions are getting. But the desire for the guide was clear, and regardless of how well it does, I'm glad that I made it, because it was so much fun playing this faction and making this video. People will argue the militia don't get picked because they're weak, but after this video, I hope you understand that they can be really strong, just in different areas, and that overall, they're just misunderstood. I think the player base has a problem with playing factions differently in general. Everyone plays every faction the same, so they expect every faction to have the same play style as the last, the same strengths and weaknesses, the same vehicle capabilities, the same infantry capabilities, all across the board. But what's the point in having all these factions if they're just carbon copies of each other? What's the point in having 13 different playable factions if we're just gonna play the same 4 all the time? And while we're at it, what's the point of 24 maps if we're only going to play the same 6 over and over? It's the classic tyranny of the majority issue. And I know I'm not the first one to talk about this. And yes, I know there are servers that don't use the voting system, but I found it hard for a while to make a new faction guide at all because most servers are just reruns of the same matchups and maps. I started this series because I want people to realize that the militia isn't the exception, but the standard. All factions in Squad have their own quirks, their own strengths and weaknesses, and their own playstyles. And if we as a player base played each faction to their strengths, then I think we'd be better off for it. Squad would be better off for it. The game would be more dynamic and interesting in general. But that's something that starts with you, and me. It's time for us to embrace each faction's differences and be open to playing a little bit differently. So, with all that said, thank you for watching the video. If you want to see more faction guides, please comment, like, and subscribe. And let me know anything I missed, or any additional tips you may have for the militia in the comment section below. That's all I got for you. Peace.